Well, I think the problem is primarily structural, right? We have an issue in drug policy, hence we have an issue with cannabis policy. And within cannabis, we have several markets. For the sake of argument, we'll classify them in four different ones. The industrial hemp market, the CBD wellness space, which is a resultant of the existence of the industrial hemp and the non-existence of the recreational market, which is the third one. And then we have the fourth one with the medical cannabis market. And within those ones, there is segmentations and complications. So obviously we have a discrepancy in between regulation in between all the different countries in the world. So it creates space for specific regulations that are highly contextualized and highly linked to the identity of the society within which it's implemented. And from there, we have a lot of, I'd say, reflexes in terms of policy that come from 100 years old of prohibition and prohibition agenda and propaganda, very, very unconscious stuff, even in the minds of people like us, that it's their job to know that. We have reflexes, and often it brings some good and some bad into regulation projects, into any of those markets. It's highly tainted in terms of political, I'd say, image and common consciousness. So that said, it has very practical implication, and we're going to see this now that Europe is going full way into the regulation of CBD, medical cannabis, and even recreational, with obviously Germany, Switzerland, and Holland that have launched very critical or questionable process, but still processes for their future legalization of adult use market. We have Luxembourg, Malta, and soon to be Italy, who are going, towards decriminalization processes. Then there's talk in Spain, in Portugal. So it's definitely a strong train, and the medical is going its way also. So we have very concrete moment where we're going to be able to define norms for a specific geographic area, but also for the future pan-European, regulation that will come at one point or another, but will come only when you have a numerous clauses sufficient enough of countries that are going towards a reform, that are able to change what's going on at the EU level and then maybe at the UN level. And so very concretely, if you take the question of adult use, that I think is very complex and is really where the difficulties lies. Even if we intend to do something good, we don't really know sometimes how things going to work. Contrary, I think, to medical, where I think there is a lot of leeway because there's much more things that have been experimented, and we already have a lot of context that can be, used and replicated. It's a question about making a round, which is the pharma model with the square of the cannabis, medical cannabis market. And this is very interesting. And this is transposed also on the regulation of the adult use. We see that in Germany because it has a thriving medical market. And so you have economic interest that will maybe have a tendency to favor, their business plan, which means, products made in EU GMP facilities and produced under EU GACP certification, which is the model for the pharmaceutical ingredients of medication, of drugs. And this is something that will be presented as a need to, give the best to consumers and make the product as safe as possible. And this is a reflex from prohibition, what I mentioned earlier. Yeah. This is really about using health when the current situation is really terrible. So we're right there. And so to make it better, we're gonna just go right there. And it's still problematic, and we're still not answering issues upon which we need to base our regulation for the adult use market. And I think it should be number one priority, fight off the black market. And by fighting the black market, you need to know what consumers want and are willing to pay for. And what that said, you can implement very interesting innovations and techniques that already exist also to have a traceability from the seed to the consumer with analysis along the way. The question of analysis is actually central and almost the only thing that regulatory have really to put efforts in it, because to have access for every part of the chain, for the smallest actors have access to testing capacity so they can show that there hasn't been adulterations or contamination of any kind, and still very, very good product. That allows to have amazing, I think, quality cannabis. If we, allow what we see happening in other sectors, in food, more and more people are going for, short circuits, terroir with taste and, production locally that is organic and diverse. This is, what we do here in France with, the appellation contrôlée, control appellations, where we valorize a savoir-faire, a knowledge and a how-to from a specific place and with the soil, with the climate. And this makes a particular product. And that's why everyone wants champagne. And while you could have, sparkling white wine from everywhere, but because you have terroir champagne, appellation controlled of origin from there, it creates quality and it creates value. And I do believe that if the European cannabis industry, the European context wants to survive into what's, I think, going to happen in the next 10, 20 years, it has to focus in highly valuable products, because means of production, cost is going to be much lower in many other parts of the world that are going for legalization. Commerce will take its place at one point. Canada will want to do bilateral or multilateral treaties on cannabis commerce, and they won't be the only ones. And to compete, Europe has to do what it does actually now, which is, sophisticated, qualitative, robust product. I think France has a lot of skills and atout for this, but I think other countries on the continent have. So I think it's some of those things we have to remember. And the last big chunk that I'll mention, I think, is the questions related to one side, the right to grow, and the other side is social equities issue. And I think those must be the central membrane of any legalization process. So one side, you have the necessity to allow for home growing and to make, social clubs. This is very important, as much as giving the possibility to every actor of the chain to have access easily to licenses. I think it's primordial. We see how it is being handled in the US, most notably, and it's really something that is crucial. And on the other side is to never forget the context and the history and the social and economic impact of the plant, of its deregulation and prohibition and its newfound legalization and regulation. The communities, the people that have been primarily impacted by drug policy enforcement. We have to consider those issues. we have to make space, we have to give empowerment, we need to take consideration of all those issues. And I think it should be, for me, it's the north face of any legalization, because it's highly contextualized and it's really delicate, it's politically delicate. So I'm thrilled to be able to, bring my stone to the construction of this edifice. And what we're doing with Christophe now, I think, is trying to help companies go into that direction. So I'll stop there.